Boop. Hello. It's been 2 years. We're back.
Yeah.
I'm back with Logan Reynolds, the Cowboy Philosopher, as I refer to him.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time. We've both since graduated the MA program, and we wanted to do this again because I'll be moving out of state for my PhD program. So we wanted to meet up again and try doing this. So
Congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you very much.
That's good.
How are you doing, by the way?
I'm good. Just going along.
Living the life.
Yeah.
But now that we've both finished the program, I wanted to lead into your thesis a bit and get some of your thoughts. And as we discussed before we were going to do this, I wanted to ask you about something you told me. You told me it fairly early on when we met about sort of, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't want to make it sound
too crazy,
but you know what I'm talking about. This experience that you had. I'll let you frame it how you want, but I thought it was a very good way to lead into some of the ideas that you've had on and philosophy of science and causation and stuff like this. So
no, that'd be good. So in undergrad, so I got my bachelor's I majored in history, and then I minored in political science and philosophy. And I didn't find philosophy till fairly late. As far as like a dedicated academic discipline. And so my senior year, I think it was senior year, may have been tail end of junior, took a logic course and a philosophy of it was evil in the Holocaust.
That's right.
Was the first that I took, and then
that's where
I think that was
the Bataille paper for. Yeah,
that was no, the Bataille paper. Oddly enough, was for a course that I took the semester before I applied.
Oh,
so
okay, interesting.
Little background: I graduated in 4 years. Went back for a 5th year to complete a minor in public history. Wound up dropping it and completed the minor in philosophy. And then took a year off, and then came back for one more semester in preparation for applying here. So this was evil in the Holocaust and logic I think it was fall semester senior year. And then I took, I know for a fact, I think I took existentialism and philosophy and science fiction.
That's what it was.
Spring semester, senior year. And a funny thing happened several different times. I don't really remember how many, but several. I had a little routine that I'd go through. I'd show up. It was funny. I had it down to almost to a science. I didn't really try to do it this way, but it was the way it worked out. I'd get up. I commuted my last year and a half. And I'd drink a cup of coffee on the drive in. And then I'd go to the cafe and I'd get just a large black coffee. And funny thing about me is I have been known to nurse coffees of that size for sometimes 2, 3, 4 hours. Just a little here, a little there.
I think I've seen you do that.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. Side topic, but for me, dosing and delivery is everything with caffeine. If I drink too much too fast, I'll just burn to a frazzle, and it's just no good. It's very chaotic. But if I do it on kind of a slow drip of delivery system, especially with an engaging stimulus, something to do, then it can have remarkable effects. And that's sort of what I'm getting at here. So I'd have a cup on the drive-in, then I'd get this venti black coffee from the cafe there, and then I'd go sit in the library and I'd read a little bit of whatever it was we were about to talk about in class while I drank that, and then I would continue drinking it through the class. And I noticed this had a real tendency to happen. It happened a lot in philosophy and science fiction, I think because a lot of that class was taught with films.
Right.
We would watch the movies and then we would write papers and do things related to the films. One I remember in particular, there was a couple. Of course, we did The Matrix, naturally. Mm-hmm. We did a movie called Arrival.
Arrival?
Yeah.
Arrival. Yeah.
And there were a couple of others. Those are the two that I really remember doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And although this would also happen in the other films, because I would frequently write in a little black moleskin notebook while class was going on.
In impeccable cursive, by the way.
Yeah, it's all right. And
I'm just embarrassing him with my praise, you know.
That's not hard to do. And frequently I'd be writing in class while either a movie or the lecture was going on, and usually I'd have some idea in my mind. And meanwhile, I'm still sipping on this coffee. And then I would go after class to the library and I would continue writing about whatever it was that I was hashing out. And a funny thing would happen from time to time, somewhat frequently, where it was like it built and it built and it built and just start going up and up. And I'm chasing whatever idea it was I was working. I'd have some idea that I was working on, and I'd be writing about that idea and drinking coffee, and the lecture's going on or the movie's playing, and that's giving me input, and I'm sorting through all this, and it's building and building, and then I go to the library and I keep hunting it down, and then bang, there'd be this moment where it's going to sound self-aggrandizing or a delusion of grandeur, but almost something like a divine clarity would snap into place. Whatever it is I'd been chasing down would snap into this kind of crystalline clarity, and the psychophysiological state that came along with that, I've described it as quasi-psychedelic.
Mm-hmm.
Now I say that having had no psychedelic experience, but from everything I've been told, everything I've heard, there was this ecstatic, semi-visual quality to it. I wasn't having visions per se, but the way that I describe it was I would frequently have a couple of different feelings or sensations. One of them is it was as if everything glowed almost. Now it didn't literally glow, like it didn't.
Yeah.
There wasn't literally light emitting from everything, but it felt like it took on a profound significance, like there was meaning in everything. It was a very powerful feeling. And the other sensation and almost visual that I got was when these moments would break through, it was like I could see a glowing grid-like web running through everything. We talked about this a little bit before we started filming, those grid-like structures that they use to illustrate space-time sometimes.
Yeah.
It was very much like that, except it was glowing. It was almost golden. And it was like it was charged with energy, and I could actually feel my hands wrapping around it. And when you could touch it, it would just electrify you almost. Yeah. It's difficult to describe, but that's the sense that I got. It was almost visual. I could almost see these things. I wasn't hallucinating. They weren't actually in my field of vision, so to speak, but they were very much in my mind's eye.
Yeah.
It was like they were there. It was like I could feel it. It was like I'd grabbed a hold of a live wire and it tapped into something. And that happened on a fairly frequent basis, especially that semester, but it's happened other times.
Like that specific imagery or different imagery?
That feeling of...
Excuse me.
That imagery, that mental imagery pretty frequently, and the ecstatic, divine clarity of it, like something that had been a puzzle for so long, at least for a moment, wasn't.
Yeah.
It's like it had locked together and something had, kind of been born out of it. It happens with some less frequency now because I'm not in that setting quite so often, but especially for that semester of undergrad, that happened quite a bit. And so I don't know how many people have tripped on coffee and philosophy, but I tell you, it can be done. It can be done. Maybe not as potent as some of the more typical psychedelic compounds, but I went places.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds weird to say. I'm aware of how weird that is to say, but it's one of the only ways to describe it, because I don't know what happened. I don't know what that was. But I can tell you that it happened, that I experienced it, and that whatever it was had those sensations and mental images with it.
Yeah. Well, so I'll actually jump in here, because actually, literally just the way you chose to describe it this time. So I've definitely had similar-ish experiences. Particularly the way that you described it is, it's not like I'm literally seeing something in my physical field of vision, and yet there's an idea in my mind's eye that's like, there's moments like peaks where it becomes so real that it's like I can reach out and touch it and interact with something. I've had things kind of like that before, especially with when getting moments of clarity with understanding a concept. But one of those moments was directly related with a concept that you had been trying to get across to me for like a year. And that was related to, if I may give some introduction to this, it's related to an idea that you developed in your thesis that I don't know if you would, but in my mind, I relate it to the web that you were describing, which that you've repeatedly referred to as having a connection with Einstein's web, and I've kind of wondered whether Einstein might have visualized something similarly, because Einstein writes in a couple of places, I need to find them, but he writes in very glowing terms about what he believed was sort of the advent of field theories. He liked this notion of field theories and thought that this was going to either take the place of or at least become just as important of it. It was superseding what he referred to as the old purely mechanistic theories, that you now had what he referred to as field theories, where you have these fields that go through all of space and time and have almost like the rules of the universe built into them or something like this, and are very mathematical. In any case, the concept that you were bringing up to me was, and you can correct me, please correct me when I turn it over to you again, but from what I understand, well, so it's a little easier to explain it this way. So it's about causation, the notion of causation of one thing causing another. I guess you can't really see it on the table, but if I moved one and it hit the other, right? So I caused one to move, and it hit the other marker and knocked it down, and they both fell down, right? And so the common sense or way of describing that is as a series of causes. And you were very adamant on their this having to do with the very structure of the universe. And the way that I've come to understand what you're talking about, and the way I understand your thesis, is strictly anti-Humean. So David Hume is a famous Scottish philosopher from the 1700s, and one of the famous things that he argued was that there is no, if you are to be the strictest of empiricists, there is no empirical evidence for causation as such. What he means by that is, if we go back to this, right, all you see, it's kind of like watching a film. If you see a film playing, you would be wrong to say that if the film is, well, you're watching it right now. If you were to look at the screen and say, oh, there's literally a marker in my screen that hits this marker and knocks it down, you'd be incorrect. It's a totally different set of causes that are related to the light playing around in your screen. This is an unusual way to explain David Hume, but the idea that he had was that maybe the universe is more of just like this movie that is playing out, and there isn't necessarily a connection that is to speak of causes is perhaps confused. This hits this and then they both fall down, but what right do we actually have to say that one causes the other to fall down? Could it not just be that they're moving in space and then they both happen to fall down? I feel like I might have butchered that explanation. Anyway, the point is that you do not like that. And you were insisting on there being a metaphysical reality to causation. And this is all introduction for an experience that I'd had that I told you about some time ago, where I was thinking about some of the ways you had been describing it. And for a long time, I kind of, just sort of had it in my head of like, okay, this is interesting and it's probably true, but I don't know why he's so adamant about it. And I was sitting in my car, and I don't know why this happened. I was not drinking coffee, because I don't drink coffee. So it apparently coffee is not necessary to trigger this sort of experience. But I just had the image in my head was of I think it was because you had told me, and you had given me an image. You had described this notion of like, because you'd also described this idea of the universe having a like a function, like 2x plus 3. You plug in a number and you get an output, and the universe has like a set of rules or functions, and the output or the input you put in, you are guaranteed to get certain outputs. And so that, combined with this other image of almost like pulling on the strings that are connected to things or something like this. And
that might be the tesseract that I talked to you about.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, comparing a tesseract to us watching a television set.
Right, or something. Yes, that's what it was. Because I remember I was sitting in my car, and I think you told me about that after I described the experience, actually. So I didn't have that immediately in mind, but then I recognized it when you were describing it. Because what I remember, it's very hard to describe. But what keeps popping into my head is it like very thin, delicate strings, and this notion of like, and even beyond that, just the assertion that no, there is something real about causation. Causation is real. The fact that this hits this and knocks it down is not just an illusion. It's not just something that we're used to because we always see it do that. That we always, when I drop them, they always fall. No, there's a reality, almost as though there were like, not literally like this, but like there were strings running through the objects and connecting them with the earth, and the strings are the law of gravity or something, and it pulls them down.
The rules are real.
That's what it was. The rules are real. There are rules to, and that's necessary for the universe to operate in the way that it does. So anyway, that I just remember having that image, and I can't at will summon that feeling that I had in my car, which I feel like is actually very important. I can't just at will get myself to feel how real it was to me in my car. It was an experience that came to me. And I remember telling you about that, and you were like, he finally had the experience. He saw what I've been seeing and trying to get across. Yeah. And I feel like you've had a devil of a time trying to get it across to other people in the program.
It's
at least from my perspective.
It's a strange thing to try and get across, because it's making explicit what has been behaviorally implicit.
Yeah.
For 3.5 billion years. And what I mean by that is, so when I said, so I'm going to, you're partially right about my relationship with Hume.
Okay.
I think Hume actually made a very important observation. His conclusion from it, I think, was wrong.
Right.
But I'm going to paraphrase this and butcher it a little bit, but the idea of Hume's that I honed in on and gently critiqued, but also made use of, was the idea that in observing pairs of supposed causes and effects, you could never actually directly observe what he referred to as necessity. Right. You could never, that was inobservable. And as a strict empiricist, you just see, and we hear this now kind of phrase, these ordered pairs, this ordered pair idea. Right. Sometimes we hear about it even now. That was part of the, I don't want to say rebuke, but the when I defended this thesis, that was a phrase that was used in some good-natured testing opposition. Was these ordered pairs, basically just saying you can see cause and effect, and Hume's idea was what we call necessity was really just, in the mind. It was the jump that the mind took upon seeing these pairs of causes and effects so consistently linked together that we just, in our heads, place that out there.
We are used to this falling when I drop it. We're so used to it that we think that it must be so, that it will do that,
And so my adjustment on that was I at some point became fascinated with the idea that what we called a cause was insufficient as an actual causal mechanism. And I don't remember what initially spurred it. I think maybe it was reading Mackey.
I think J.L. Mackey?
Yeah.
In case anyone wanted to.
John Mackey.
Yeah.
Mackey developed, we can get to that. All of that to say, I think Hume was right in that if you take it strictly at what you can observe, even if you can observe very deeply, in the end, and I think this is where the anti-realists, where scientific anti-realists about when anti-realists about causation, they run into trouble, and why they are stuck with this ordered pair idea is, even if you can observe very deeply, you're still left with a jump between the observable phenomena.
Right.
So that, I think that part of Hume is correct. You can't see the link between them. But what I arrived at was, it is not. So the way I first started exploring it was I for some reason got the idea to play around with linear equations.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason that seemed like a thing to do, because I think at some point my brain went, cause and effect is like input output.
Mm-hmm.
That was the initial seed that spawned all this. Well, I thought, okay, so X and Y. Okay. And for whatever reason, I eventually arrived at the arbitrary one I played with was Y equals 2X plus 3. Okay, well what is that? Well, if X is an input and Y is an output, Y equals 2X plus 3 is a rule specifying what Y will be given whatever X is. But it in itself is not Y, and it in itself is not X. It's the mediator between the two.
Right.
And so, in a sense, it is, so one of the examples I use is, if X equals 2, then Y equals 7.
Right.
But it is not that a priori, it is not necessarily a fact of the universe that no matter what, if X equals 2, Y equals 7.
Right.
It is, in this case, the fact that X equals 2 plus the rule that Y equals 2X plus 3, which then brings about the fact that Y equals 7. It is the combination of input and rule that then yields output. And I modified that just slightly, although I used that example in the thesis. I used that example to kind of illustrate what I'm trying to get at, is that it is not per se that letting go of a suspended marker necessarily must, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And we know this, and I use the counter examples to kind of illustrate the point. Here on Earth, if I let go of a suspended marker, it's going to fall. If I do that in the International Space Station, something different is going to happen. Now, we can talk about the fact that that is a combination of inputs.
Right.
Because part of the input is the circumstances that you're in. But again, even that runs, so that brings me to Mackey, right? Mackey's idea of necessity was not ever that single inputs and single outputs, single causes and single effects, that it's not so much that they were necessarily bound, but he conceived of it as, so if any of you have ever studied logic, let's see if we can do this here. You might be familiar with the horseshoe, what we call a horseshoe here, the conditional. If this, then necessarily this. He contended that necessity did not really behave in this way. He fleshed it out as, can't remember if it's a conjunction of disjunctions. I think is what that was. No, it's a disjunction of conjunctions.
Yes, yeah,
so
that's right.
It might be this and this, or this and this, then, then T, we'll say. It was a combination, and there might be a variety of combinations. that could yield this. But it had to be the fulfillment of the combination. So that's why we might say, if I drop this here on Earth, if I let go of this, let go of a suspended marker on Earth, and we can specify, gravitation and all this, then it's going to drop. But if I do the same action, in a sense, on the International Space Station, it's going to remain where it was. And so what we conceive of as the input, although it's not actually the input, can yield different results. And so it is a combination of things that yields a given output or a given effect. What I realized was, though, this is not representative of causation as such. This is a representation of necessity. So this, in some sense, is the y equals 2x plus 3. This is 2x plus 3. This is the rule. It's a representation. It's an abstraction of the rule. But this alone can never yield t. We know this from logic. P horseshoe q, so to speak, can never in and of itself yield q. This can never yield t. Much in the same way, y equals 2x plus 3 on its own cannot yield y equals 7. It needs x equals 2 to do that. And so I had the thought that, well, I actually think this is an excellent representation of necessity. This is something like a metaphysical rule of reality that we have instantiations of, I think. I think we have clear instantiations of. This is a metaphysical rule of reality, but it needs a partner to do the dance. And so I came to the realization it is necessity coupled with an input. And so that's where I eventually, this started, how do I want to phrase this? It started as this, and it's moved to, now we've kind of identified a logical form, a logical representation of necessity per se, not the causation, not actual causation, just the necessity, where it is the combination of inputs which then necessarily is tied to a particular output. But in keeping with the idea that the rule alone is not sufficient to bring about the output, I realized, in a sense, we'll have to change the logical form here in a little bit. In order to actually, if we imagine T as the effect, if we imagine the consequent as the effect, so to speak, we need the antecedent. Essentially, we're arriving at a modus ponens kind of idea here. Much in the same way, in order to get whatever actual value for y, we need an actual value for x. Until then, we can just calculate the hypotheticals. And so, what I arrived at...
Oh, you need an
I'm
eraser?
going to look for an eraser here real quick. What I arrived at...
One right over there.
And this is getting a bit in the weeds, but what I came to and proved is an interesting, I think it's interesting, little piece of quantificational logic, second order quantificational logic. Let's see if I can remember what it is off the top of my head. I wound up saying for any x, so for anything, I'll break this down as I write it down. For any x, for anything, and for any phi that represents any way in which this thing is. And so I'm phrasing it like that, but we can think of a thing being a way as a state of affairs. Mm-hmm. Something is a certain way. Phi of x just means for whatever thing and for whatever way in which that thing is that way. Remember the y equals 2x plus 3 here. This is going to be our effect. The effect is if and only if there is some y, some other thing, and there is some psi, some way in which this other thing is, such that, I think we got room, good.
Oh, I want to make sure my head wasn't in the way.
No, you're good. Such that psi of y necessarily brings about phi of x and, this is the kicker, psi of y is actually the case. And we may have some parentheses not quite going the way that they need to, but I think that's right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So, for anything and for any way in which a thing may be, a thing is a way, a state of affairs is the case, an effect is, if and only if there is some other thing and some way in which that thing is, such that, so if this is our effect, this is our supposed cause, such that it is the case that what we would call the cause is sufficient to bring about the effect, or that the effect will necessarily come from the cause, and the cause is in fact the case. This is not enough. Going back to P horseshoe Q can't yield Q on its own. Psi of y horseshoe phi of x can never, in and of itself, yield phi of x. But if we have psi of y horseshoe phi of x and psi of y is in fact the case, and I've maybe gone about this backwards. Maybe I should have done some practical some practical examples first. That's okay, we'll get there. You need the union of these two to produce this. And this was the logical form that my idea eventually turned into. It was, you need the union of an input and a rule to produce the output. And the output is produced if and only if the rule exists and has been fulfilled. So, some practical examples that I sometimes give. So I have a big lighter here in my pocket. If I had a piece of paper or we'll say a piece of paper or a cigarette or whatever. I had something. We'll say a piece of paper because it's simpler. And I put this lighter to it. We would say that my putting the lighter to it caused the paper to burn. And in everyday parlance, that's absolutely fine. There's no problem with that whatsoever. Because it's an enthymeme, essentially. It's an argument with a suppressed premise or an understood premise. We don't need to specify this for our everyday actions. But if we're going to actually tackle what it means metaphysically, to say that something, to talk about causation in a serious and technical manner, I think we need to break this down and understand what's really going on. Because it's not much like letting go of a suspended marker, can produce one effect here on Earth and another effect on the space station or on the moon or whatever, we can see it as clear that simply letting go of the marker isn't enough. And so simply adding flame to paper, in a sense, cannot be enough. And another example that I use is you can have one human being who ingests peanuts and experiences no ill effects. You can have another human being who ingests peanuts and goes into anaphylaxis. Well, why is that? Well, they're allergic to peanuts. What does that mean? It means that the introduction of the peanuts to their body produces a negative reaction. It sets in motion these effects. Now, why is that? Because this is the problem that you run into, and this is the problem that the anti-realist will point to, is, well, you're just moving it around. You're moving the box, but you never actually figure out where the box is. I think I figured out what is, I think this ultimately has to be part of the answer, because this is why it's difficult. This is why it's difficult. And it's also been a little bit of time since I've really dove headfirst into this.
I apologize, I put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. This is good, because it's forcing me to figure out a way to say it that's salient. We take it for granted that dry paper on in earthly conditions, paper ignites at, for artistic purposes, we'll say 451 degrees Fahrenheit. We can see that introducing flame to something does not necessarily make it catch fire. If I hold that same Bic lighter to a piece of metal, it's not going to ignite it. So obviously fire is not enough to produce ignition of the new thing, so to speak. But if we imagine for a moment that it is a fact of reality, and we can talk about that a little bit, we'll come back to this. If we imagine that it is a fact of reality, that under these conditions, which would be the antecedent of this conditional here, under these conditions, the ignition of the paper is a necessary consequence. If we imagine that as a fact of reality, and then combine that with the actual introduction of flame to paper, then we can see how that relationship begets the actual ignition of the paper. It's the conditional with the fulfillment of the antecedent. It's the rule with the fulfillment of the conditions. And logically, it makes sense. We can figure out how. So I'll give you another example. Let's look at what happens if there is an understood causal relationship, so to speak, which would be represented by a rule something like this, and the conditions aren't met. Okay? Well, what's a good example? Well, let me say this. We'll go back to the paper idea. I would like to ignite the paper, but as we've specified, it needs to be something like you need to introduce heat of a certain magnitude to dry paper in an oxygenated environment, and then we have the necessity of the paper igniting being, the consequent of that. If you don't fulfill the conditions, you're in an environment with no oxygen, or the paper is soaking wet, or you don't introduce the flame, or you don't introduce any heat, you don't introduce the heat necessary, you don't hit that 451, so to speak, then the consequent does not happen. So we can see that we know it is possible to ignite paper. And that's, in a sense, what a phrase like this means. We know it is possible. It is laid out that if these conditions are met, then this output will happen. But if the conditions are not met, then the output doesn't happen. And we know this. In our everyday causal interactions, we know this. You don't get what you want if you don't do what it takes to get what you want. We know that. Our lives are built around that. Right down to, if I want to leave this room, I have to remove myself from this chair and actually walk across the room, open up the door, walk through the doorway. Now, we don't make any of this explicit, but we know this deeply, that this is how all action in the world operates. There's an understanding that I must fulfill the conditions of the rule to get what comes out of it. I need, back to the math, I need X to have an actual value in order to get Y to have an actual value. And if there is a particular value of Y that I want, I need a particular value of X.
Right.
And if I don't plug that in, I won't get it. If I want Y equals 7, I can't plug in that particular equation, that particular formula. If I want Y to equal 7, I can't plug in X equals 3. It won't work. No matter what I do, it will not work. This is the same way. So, we might say, if I want paper to ignite, it needs to be dry in an oxygenated environment and exposed to heat above a certain magnitude. It needs a certain amount of heat applied to it. If you fulfill those, then you will get the ignited paper. If you don't, then you won't. I believe all, and I'm willing to go ahead and say that for the moment, I'm willing to believe all interactions, maybe the existence of everything, and I understand how grand a claim that is, operates on this principle. Why is that so strange, and why did that produce an interesting experience for Michael? And why would Hume object to it? And I think I know why Hume would object to this sort of idea. A thing being a certain way, so in this case, the cy and the phi of x. A thing being a certain way, or a set of circumstances being a certain way, is very clearly observable. That's so part of what I pulled from for the thesis is Aristotle's definition of truth. To say of something that it is, yeah. And to say of that which is not, that it is not, is to say a true thing.
Right.
As far as we're concerned, we don't need to get into the philosophy of color perception. To say that this marker is blue is perfectly observable. To say that it is Thursday is yes. Perfectly observable. I am wearing a hat.
Yes.
To say of things that are or are not,
mm-hmm.
that they are or are not, is very easy to do, in a sense. I mean, you know what I mean. They're yes. Very difficult scientific endeavors, I suppose.
Well, yes.
Those observations are difficult, but
there's things that it's hard to know for sure whether they are or are not, but
right.
And therefore it's hard to speak the truth about them, but
these are temporally immediate.
Yes.
They deal with reality as it is right now.
Yeah.
This is unobservable except in its apparent effects, and is, I guess, obliquely observable. And this is this is one reason why Hume would disagree with me. I believe there is a very important role for inductive thinking to play in philosophy and in science. How many times do you have to observe a pattern before you begin to suspect that there is in fact a pattern, even if you can't see the mechanism, so to speak. How many times do you have to see the ordered pair before you suspect that there's a damn reason for it?
Right.
So I place a significant amount of importance on inductive thinking. And we construct these. Now, we don't formulate them like this in our daily lives. We construct these all the time, in a sense. Eventually, how many times do you have to stub your toe before you have to figure out that maybe the table is in the wrong place?
Right.
So to speak.
Right.
You observe that doing certain things produces certain outcomes, and eventually once you see that link enough, if it's desired, you keep it up, and if it's not desired, you adjust your interaction with the system. If any of you are archers out there, you'll understand this very well. If you take a shot and you take it the same way every time, and you miss every time, you understand that you have to adjust something, whether it's your sights, your point of aim, something needs to change, because whatever you are doing is not working. It's the same way here. There is this inductively observed necessity. This rule exists. And maybe that is all that Hume was getting at. But I'm willing to go a step further and say, no, we're not just concocting useful tools. And part of this has to do with I am a realist about modeling. Models only work if they a model works only if it, in some capacity or another, faithfully represents some element of reality.
Yes.
And so, I've gotten down a rabbit hole here. There's so many things that tie into this. The fact that we conjure up something like this in our heads, that there is a rule to the system that if we interact with it properly, we will get what we want. The fact that we have any success with that whatsoever, to me, is evident of the fact that it somehow faithfully represents the territory. The map is not the territory, but a good map will help you navigate the territory. And the territory is something like, this goes back to the theory of truth and what perturbed Michael when he realized it, was we can observe that the marker is blue, or we can observe that the flame was introduced to the paper. But if this is true, that means this is true. And the horseshoe, so to speak, is a statement of, we can interpret it temporally, it makes sense to do that for the moment, what will be. These are statements of what is. The horseshoe in this instance is something like a statement of what will be, or what must be. And that relationship, until it is carried out, is invisible. We can't see the law of gravity. We can't see something like E equals mc squared. We can't see these. We can observe the apparent relationship enough to construct good formulas to describe it, but we can't see the fact that this rule apparently exists. But when we act as though it does, we are successful. And that, to me, as a realist, says, this is real. It may not look exactly like this. In the paper, I actually demonstrate that it can be like Mackey's, expanded, because obviously it's still probably not one antecedent and one consequent. It's likely a combination, and you can actually do this with this formula. But to put it in its simplest form, this is good enough. But it is not. What this eventually winds up suggesting is that there is a metaphysical component to physical causation. That causal interactions are governed by non-material forces. That the only reason anything happens at all is because the union of something physical, a physical input into the system, and something like an immaterial rule, an immaterial fact of reality, which is a very strange thing, and for anti-realists, a very uncomfortable thing to contemplate. For empiricists, an incredibly uncomfortable thing to contemplate. But we're talking about an immaterial fact of reality that exerts tremendous power over our interactions, our interfacing with reality itself.
Yeah.
And the network of these, in a way, gives structure to everything. And you can imagine, why must there be a rule? Well, certainly if there's no rules, there's chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And if we imagine a totally disordered system, it's not even a system, it's nothing. It's this board if it's completely white.
Right.
In a sense, there is nothing.
Right.
Nothing real in any real sense. And so this is, to me, the foundation of all ordered causal systems. It is the conjunction, the union of an input with a rule, and that is what causes the output.
Right.
It's just that we've made implicit, we've taken for granted all the many causal rules that we know.
Right.
We've taken them for granted, thrown them on the subconscious back burner, and kind of forgotten that they exist. And so we can just say, well, if I want to light a fire, I need some dry stuff and I need to put some heat to it.
Right.
And it works, but if you want to break it down on a technical level, that only works because it is a fact of reality that if you do this, then this will happen. So Hume was correct to say that we can't observe necessity directly. We can't. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. And that's the spooky.
Right.
That's the spooky rub.
Right.
Because what you wind up saying out of this is that the rules are real.
Yes.
The laws of causation and reality exist. There is an ontological reality to something that we can't see.
Yes.
And that was strange. But I think it's right.
Yeah.
I think it's right. I think in aggregate, all of these are what, for thousands of years, is certainly what we would call elements of Old Testament God.
Mm-hmm.
This is the framework of reality itself, without which there is none. And in the work that this thesis was originally a part of, a larger work, this causal angle was one angle of a broader discussion of the idea of what we call the logos, the ordering structure of reality itself, and this is one element of it. I've rambled for a while. So.
You were totally good. I wanted to, so I wasn't being facetious with the thumbs up. I was like, this is what I wanted, because I find your thesis very fascinating. So that was actually a really good summary of
Well, thank you.
the main points. Yeah, no, and I wanted to, because the thought just kept occurring to me, and I hadn't thought about this before actually, that this kind of a model or an approach to the universe is, I think, necessary if you want to have any kind of theory of certainly of free will or of human agency or of human action. So what I mean by that, and not just human action, but it would seem to be necessary to underlie a view of the universe. So if, for example, if you believe that, so hitherto, you had the old Enlightenment view where the universe is like a giant clockwork, right? Mm-hmm. And so they were effectively reviewing it as a version of this. It's just that the entire universe is one big clockwork machine, and God winds it up at the beginning of time, and then everything is deterministic. But you have that input at the beginning of time, and then you have the set of rules, and then it runs through. So that would be one way of looking at it. But the way I almost prefer looking at it, which seems to be much closer to how you've conceived it, if I'm getting it properly, is because you've talked with me about how free will can fit into this model, and in my mind, free will would almost have to presuppose a model like this, because what's the right way of putting it? In order to have a free being who can act in the universe and it not just be chaos and it means something, what you can't have, obviously, is you can't have the movie idea. By that I simply mean where everything is truly determined, like it is in a movie. Mm-hmm. It's already been printed on the film, and right. It's just running through and it's just showing you what happens. But each frame of the film is not causally related to each frame of the film. Mm. It obviously, when you're running a movie, it's a different kind of causation because it's light shooting through it. But in terms of the movie itself, they're not related to each other. So that would be one theory of a universe where everything is perfectly determined, quote unquote, but there's no causation involved. So that anything could, in theory, happen. And that I don't think is correct. But if you get rid of that model, then you have to use something like this, I think, because this is what allows you to have actual actors in a world who choose the inputs that they're going to put in. They're interacting with that grid. They're interacting with the universe, and there are rules put in place so that their actions have set consequences. It's not random. Yes. It's they interact with the rules. They they put inputs in and they get certain outputs. And like this is something you've discussed before, and you were bringing it up with the Old Testament God. This notion of you make a certain kind of sacrifice and you get a certain kind of outcome. You follow such and such a rule, and you get. I mean, the Old Testament God makes covenants with people. This is a thing that he does again and again, where he says, "I'm going to make a covenant with you," and a covenant is like a promise. It's like a rule. If you do this, then I am bound to do this in return. There's a concept. It was it's in the Doctrine and Covenants. It's in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon scriptures. It was a revelation given to Joseph Smith where it's God speaking, and I'm going to misquote it. I can look up the exact reference, but he says it's something along the lines of, there is a law irrevocably instituted at the foundation of the world that effectively means that any blessing or any good thing, as it were, that is given to somebody is given to them because they were obedient to a certain law, and under no other conditions They have to, it's basically what you're saying. They have to meet certain conditions. And if they do, then it's effectively God saying, I have to give them the blessing. I am constrained to do it because I obey these laws I myself have instituted, is kind of what it's saying. Again, I might be elaborating on what the strict scripture is actually saying, but it's that in my mind is necessary for you to have any kind of human agency or free will, because if you don't have that, then either you're just part of a film, everything that you do is predetermined, you didn't decide to do this or that, but if you're an actual actor existing in like a framework, and you interact with the rules, you choose what you're going to do, and then you get the result from it. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's like characters in a video game. You create the video game world, and there's rules, there's physics to that world that have been programmed into it that enable you as the controller to put inputs into the system and get set outputs. If you don't have a set input-output system like this, then you have no existence or reality at all.
Right.
So that, I think, is part of why this is so fascinating to me, because I actually think it accords, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, it accords very nicely with my own theology. And I know it's not just my theology, but there's, you can tie it in with Christianity in general, but particularly with what I'll call Mormon theology, this is the fact that you're talking about it as it's, and I guess the additional thing, and this is what was particularly spooky to me, was that, because, it's one thing for me to say, oh yeah, we've been saying the same thing. It's like, well, we've been saying similar things, but you add quite a bit more, and one of the key things you add is that emphasis on the rules are real. They have this reality to them. That, I think, was the key thing when I was sitting in the car that I read, because you had kept saying that to me. The rules are real.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I get it. You keep saying that. And then I'm sitting in the car, and all of a sudden, I assume what you've experienced that caused you to keep saying that hit me, where I was like, and I guess the way that I conceived it, was in this more kind of theological religious terms, where, God created the rules and they have this ontological reality, and the only way I can understand it is as literal, like strings running between things and making it so that if I do this, it's going to pull on these strings and cause other things to happen. But the fact that I moved my arm, that itself, I don't believe is purely, maybe it's in part determined in some way by other strings that have happened, but there is a genuine freedom I have. There's one more thing I wanted to point out, and that's my studies in physics and in the philosophy of physics have led me to lean more towards, I think, that one way of interpreting what is going on in quantum mechanics is down there you have systems where something analogous to a kind of free will or free action is taking place, and that has massive implications for the nature of time and for the nature of what we mean by determinism. And I think the mistake that people have made is in thinking, they think that the quantum realm is chaos. They portray the quantum realm as like, it's chaos. It doesn't have set rules. It doesn't obey rules. And that's, first of all, that's just not true at all, the idea that it doesn't obey rules. Of course it obeys rules, otherwise we couldn't make any kind of predictions.
Right.
I think the reason it freaks people out is because we can't, I've made some videos about this, but there's a limit to our predictive ability, and I tie that to the fact that there is free action going on, where the particles are in some way or to some extent, I'm still working on this, so it's very rough, but are deciding what they're going to do at set moments. And what they decide to do has certain consequences, because there are rules instituted that guide them and make it so that it isn't just chaos. I don't know how much sense that makes, but it's still a work in progress. But I'm not articulating it very well, but there's something to do with the nature of time, and the way that time related with determinism actually works. I think there's a tendency in physics to think of things in terms of a, quote, block universe, where it's like a movie. Everything is already determined beforehand. All of our actions, everything we've been saying, you writing on the board, everything that we've been doing is just a movie playing out. And they don't necessarily think of it as a movie. They think of it as, oh, no, it's objects moving in space, but the way the objects move is, predetermined by everything going all the way back to the Big Bang, right?
Right.
And my trying to introduce this whole free action thing would explode that, because it would mean it's not all determined, and that one of the reasons for the block universe is some of the conceptions of time that were introduced by Einstein that I am increasingly having some problems with. And I don't want to get into that because that's very much a work in progress, that I need to do a lot more research on. But if you want to have a theory that involves a kind of free action or free agency, you need something like this. Otherwise, it really does just become chaos. And so I've been playing around with theories of how that could possibly work. So anyway, there you go. There's my side of it.
Yeah.
But
no, I think that's good. I think on the free will end of it, it's very. So it's interesting. I am, in a certain sense of the word, intensely determinist, but also very convinced of free will. Now, what is it? How often do we manifest it? In what capacity do we manifest it? Those are separate questions. I think in some sense we certainly have free will. We probably don't exercise it as often as we'd like to think.
Sure.
I have my suspicions that it's tied into the more explicitly conscious mind, which is not always around. If you're running on autopilot, there's something else guiding you, and its patterns and all that. But you do. I think anyone who's ever had to make a really difficult decision, where it's very much in the conscious mind, understands that there's a fork in the road, and you really do seem to have the ability to go one direction or the other, sometimes even against your own wishes, which I think is even more evident because you would a simple determinist system would certainly seem to suggest that everybody's just going to do what they want.
Right.
And I would say, a fairly sophisticated determinist might be able to say that, well, you delayed your own gratification because of a sense of a greater good, and so there you go. You've satisfied a greater thing that you want, and that's determinist in some sense. But then, how do you explain violating your conscience?
Right.
Like that, the ability to know you should have made a different decision, could have made a different decision, and didn't. That's a harder one but anyway, yeah, so for me, free will definitely factors into this. You could imagine that the actual, depending on the system, you could have very complicated and less complicated causal systems described by this, with more, disjunctions of conjunctions, but for me, as a kind of free will guy, at least in those systems in which our choices ostensibly matter, there is one of the inputs, even if all the other inputs are in place, there is one input that until it is that is not yet final until the choice is made. Mm-hmm. And then that sets a different iteration of reality.
Right.
And so for me, what happens once the inputs are locked in is intensely deterministic, except for it's further complicated by the fact that what if the system involves the choices of others?
Right.
Right? And so I actually, I've never actually studied chaos theory, but I have a certain affinity for the version of it that's portrayed in Jurassic Park, because to me, this way of thinking actually naturally leads to, if you actually sit down and think about how complicated even simple causal processes are, and then you blow them up into very large systems like entire economies or political regimes or biological populations, when you consider the interwoven network of decisions and consequences and decisions and consequences and consequences which influence other decisions and consequences, you can see how it begins to spiral into this this web of possibility that is intensely deterministic, but epistemologically impossible to unravel.
Right.
Especially if it would be impossible to unravel even if you were a determinist.
Right.
But I maintain that there is one space in the inputs that is yet left available to us to influence. Right. And so when you play that out, it's the effects of any given decision. The effects of any given decision, provided the effects don't rely on others' decisions, is ontologically determined.
Right.
Once they're all locked in place. But the choice yet remains.
Right.
And there may even be other factors. I've played oftentimes with the idea that there are, this is why we can make mistakes.
Right.
Because we can believe we have a complete map of the present inputs, and we can believe we have a complete map of the rules governing the system.
Right.
And we can act. This was a bit of a rub at some point during one of my last semesters here, maybe just one part of the last year. I said we can essentially believe.
Oh, I think I remember this. Yeah.
We can believe. Let's see if I can come up with this on the fly. P dot Q horseshoe R. So if P and Q are the case, then R will necessarily be the case.
Mm-hmm.
P can already be present. And so we're looking at the system saying, well, if I would like R, so to speak, I need to insert Q into the system. And if we do that, we can reasonably expect to get R. But what if this is in this case, this is an imperfect model? If it were actually the case that there's a hidden premise, there's something that we don't know, there is a part of this that we don't know. Unbeknownst to us, it turns out that, so this is model and action. And in reality, we come to find out that it just looks like this. But there is
the actual rule, as it were.
Yeah, actual, we'll say, is P dot Q
dot S
horseshoe R if and we're getting the letters all jumbled up here, if T, but if U, then P dot Q horseshoe V. We find out that this exists and this other part of this exists, and we find out that at the moment that we try to do something, maybe most of the time the model exists in this configuration, but at the time we tried to institute it, it existed in this configuration, and so we have U, which means we have P dot Q horseshoe V. So when we put in Q, much to our surprise, we get V instead of R. It's possible that the system spends most of its time in this configuration, but sometimes spends it in this configuration. The broader point of this is, if our understanding of the system is incomplete, there are elements of the it that we didn't understand. We acted rationally.
Right.
This is valid. And
the model is valid.
The model is valid epistemologically, from an epistemological sort of, from a what we know so far sense. This is completely rational.
And yet,
but it fails.
Right.
At least that's possible. There's some other thing that we didn't know which caused our action to not go the way that we thought. And so the system allows for free will. It allows for mistakes. It's also deterministic, though. It's very sympathetic to the deterministic predisposition, because once the inputs are locked in place from an ontological point of view, from an all-encompassing point of view, which we'll never have.
Right.
If you were able to see every last bit of what was going on at the moment an input got locked into a system, the output, I contend, is determined.
Right.
It has to be. But that knowledge is not available to us. And we have decisions. And so it plays well with all of that. I thought when you were talking about, I had an interesting thought. You were talking about all blessings are the consequence of having fulfilled some law.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had the idea that basically what we call good luck is unwittingly having fulfilled the conditions of this.
Right, right.
A blessing is unwittingly falling in favor of God, basically. And maybe wittingly, oftentimes wittingly, but when we talk about just blind, dumb luck, it's having unwittingly been in the right place at the right time, which was all that particular situation needed.
Right.
I think also of a good way to convey, maybe hint at the idea of how this may reflect an element of the God of the Old Testament is, look at the story of Cain and Abel.
Right.
Right? So think of what a sacrifice is at a sort of abstracted level, and if any of you are Peterson fans, you'll understand this. It is, at one level, it's giving up something of value. At another level, it's doing something rather than something else.
Right.
And no matter what you do, you make a sacrifice. Unless you're just going to do nothing, and then that's also its own. But the point being, if I do one thing, I am allocating that slice of space-time to the performance of that act rather than another.
Right.
That's selecting the input. And it doesn't really specify why one sacrifice was favored over the other.
And I have some comments on that, but continue.
But the story does make it very clear that whatever Abel did was the input necessary to satisfy the supernatural entity and get him what he wanted.
Right.
Well, that's not much different than saying, think about it. Think about every decision you ever make. You want a cup of coffee. You have to do one of two things. You either have to make one or buy one. If you don't make a cup of coffee or buy a cup of coffee, if you don't allocate chunks of space-time to either of those two actions, unless you're just waiting around hoping someone gives one to you, you're probably not going to get it.
Right.
Right? And then whatever Cain did was not satisfactory. And sort of the one element of that is the universe doesn't care whether you think what you did should have been enough.
Yeah.
It just decides whether it was or it wasn't. And it's up to you to deal with that.
Yes.
And so in that sense, even just looking at it in this sort of metaphysical or philosophical way, regardless of the religious implications, although the religious implications are similar, Cain's screw up is not that he did this.
Right.
We all do that. Cain's screw up is that he did this and didn't adjust course.
Yes.
He didn't do the digging or the self-investigation, or he didn't have a relationship. He didn't have the relationship to the rules, so to speak, to God, as one facet of Old Testament God, the kind which doles out effects based on causes in their relationship to the rules. He didn't have the sense to examine the relationship with that and go, I did something that didn't work here.
No. And we look at what Abel's doing and maybe try doing it that way.
He didn't adjust course. And that is aside from killing his brother, that's the sin there. That's the real screw up, is blaming the rule for not giving you the effect you wanted when you didn't fulfill the antecedent, so to speak, when you didn't fulfill the conditions. That's like being upset that you can't light wet paper on fire. Right. Well, you can sit there and do that all day, or you can at least either go get a new sheet, hit it with a hairdryer. Actually, this system is open to a variety of possibilities of adjusting the situation. You know, it's not, it is likely not the case, and Mackey's model suggests this, it's not just a single combination. There might be many combinations. Right. That could yield, something approximating the desired effect. And so that's his screw up, and I think that's part of what that story tells is, I'll just say again, the universe doesn't care whether you think what you did was adequate or not.
I just realized you weren't in frame, so I scooted it over.
It cares whether it thinks it was adequate or not.
Right.
And it either was or it wasn't, and it's up to you to adjust that accordingly.
I wanted to two comments. So one was it's so interesting because so again, going back into I don't know why I'm bringing up theology so much this time, but
well, I'll tell you, you might be, because I haven't talked about it a ton, but this is part of the Logos. This is part of God. Oddly enough, from a certain point of view, from a certain kind of metaphysical point of view, this is part of God.
Yes.
I think.
I remember you talking about that with me.
I'm not upset with you getting theological at all. Because
well, I just meant specifically my
theology.
This
is the secular doorway through which I would like to walk a lot of people into a discussion about theology.
Yes. Which I mean, the more I think about it, the more I was just thinking of, again, it's from the Doctrine and Covenants, where it talks about there is how does it put it? There is no space without a kingdom, and there is no kingdom without a space. What it's talking about is this notion that there are all of existence is like a kingdom. and it has laws instituted by God, and you can have kingdoms nested in kingdoms and stuff like this, and so you can have more and more complex laws, and so you have like the spheres are identified with kingdoms as a way of thinking about it. So you and I are in a certain moral sphere as human beings that is different from the moral sphere of animals or something like this. This is speculation, but so there's that. But then also in relation to the Cain and Abel story, and I can't remember where. Oh, that's right. I believe it's in, again, it's a revelation to Joseph Smith. It was essentially kind of like a rephrasing of Genesis, or a playing on some of the themes in Genesis. So it's very interesting in that regard, because I think that the way you were talking about Cain and Abel, and that's just taking the text as it actually is in the King James Version, I really like, and I know that it's derived partially from Peterson, and that's one of my favorite things that he's done, is his discussion of the Cain and Abel story. Actually, it's interesting that there's the version that you find in, I believe, the Book of Moses, which that's the thing that was given to Joseph Smith. It's separate from the Book of Mormon. I believe it's the Book of Moses, where it specifies that it's giving another version which still accords with this, but it specifies that what was happening was, so first of all, the reason that Cain's sacrifice did not manifest in blessings was precisely because he did not do it according to the way that it had been instituted by God. So it specifies that God did in fact institute a way that sacrifices should be done, and Cain did not actually follow those rules. But that was my understanding of it anyway. You can correct me in the comments if if it turns out I've injected into the actual text without realizing it. But the thing that I'm definitely not accidentally injecting is the other important part of it was that Cain, and I don't know what you'll think of this, but Cain, the reason he goes to make the sacrifice is because before making the sacrifice, it is specified that Cain was already dabbling with Satan. He was already kind of going down a dark path, and it doesn't really explain quite why that was, but he was already giving into envy of his brother and was engaging in this relationship with the devil, is what it was saying. And it was the devil who told Cain to make the sacrifice in such and such a way, and then when Cain did it and it went bad, that was the turning point for Cain to fully turn against God. So it's adding in this extra element of the devil getting Cain to do things in a certain way in order to sort of fully destroy Cain's faith in God and in the system. Something like that, which I just was thinking there's something very interesting there potentially in this. Obviously, it's a whole other kind of thing of scripture.
That would make sense.
It's okay if you don't like it. I'm just throwing it out there.
I'm just kind of investigating it for the first time. So let me say this, regardless of whether or not I think it's true, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because I don't come from precisely the same tradition. There's something symbolically kind of interesting about it, and interesting in the greater canon of Christian works, so to speak, in that Milton's Satan certainly would fit the bill for that, because, and I say this out myself, having not read it, but understanding Peterson's take on it, as Lucifer, the light bringer, the intellect, God's highest angel gone most wrong, that falls in love with its own creations, you could see how having an improper relationship with one's own reason and intellect, if we imagine Milton's Satan, Milton's Lucifer story, if that is kind of what he symbolically represents in some sense, you can pretty clearly imagine how having an improper relationship with that, I would say, well, in secular terms, in a way, placing reason ahead of reality.
Right. Oh, I see. Yeah, I see where you're going with that. Of like, here's how the rules should go.
Right.
You know,
placing your own understanding of them above how they actually are, consequences be damned.
Right.
Which so often, there's something that makes sense about, well, I have this idea of how this system works. This idea informs how I interact with the system. I don't get the results I expect, and so often people double down.
Right.
It takes a lot to be able to let go of those previous structures, let go of your own faith in. I think it's fine in some sense to have faith in yourself and your ideas and your reasoning when the system's working. But when something isn't working, you have to understand that there's something that you're missing.
Right.
And so, sort of symbolically, I can see how that could be relevant, because it's sort of this toxic relation, this improper relationship with at least, something that Satan has symbolically
with the intellect, or yeah. No, I really like that. I had never thought of that before. That you tying in with Milton, of identifying Satan with sort of there's a couple of things I want to say. Well, so the first thing I'll say is I'm assuming you've probably heard of Ian McGilchrist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Master and his Emissary.
Have you read that?
I haven't read it, but I've seen his talks with Jordan.
Yeah.
Very interesting guy.
I haven't finished the book because it's pretty big, but I've read good chunks of it. Fascinating book. I don't know I have not watched the interview, so I don't know how much of this he talks about, but you might be able to draw the connections. But the way he describes the left brain, mm-hmm. he's talking. It's a book about the sort of the old hemispheres thing. He's a neuroscientist, correct?
Something like that.
Yeah, and I just found the book fascinating for the ideas. But he's proposing this idea that the left brain is effective. I don't believe he ever makes this connection, but I'm making it for him, connected with this notion of Lucifer, of the sort of the pure intellect, whereas the right brain would be, the way that he sets it up is this notion of information initially brought in by the right brain. It's then it's initially processed. It's then passed to. It's like holistically processed initially by the right brain. It's then passed to the left brain, which sort of picks it apart and analyzes it, and breaks it down into its structure. But then it is passed again back over to the right brain, which puts it back into a whole again, and then this, I guess, proceeds into action. Sorry, Ian, if you're watching this, if I've butchered your idea, But where I'm going with it is he spends quite a bit of time. He proposes the idea that the left brain should, effectively, he's saying the left brain should be, I don't know what you would say, subservient to the right brain. It's the emissary. It should not be the master. That's not what it's for. And it's kind of, it relates to kind of when the left brain thinks that it is the master, it's almost a similar situation with Lucifer, the light bringer, the intellect, thinking that it is greater than God or existence itself, which is closer to the right brain or something like that. So
I think it's related to his idea of Gestalt.
Yes, that's right.
Totality of a thing.
Yes, yeah. That's very much how he kind of approaches the right brain, and which is fascinating. And I also love the that's what it was. I do need to verify, because there's a lot of things that float around that are supposed to be quotes of Einstein that, are not actually, or they can't be traced back to him. But I'm pretty sure this one's correct. Supposedly, so one of the main experimental tests that is taken to confirm general relativity. I freely confess I don't fully understand it because I haven't read that much about it, but it had to do with the bending of light that was seen during an eclipse. And I can't remember for the life of me the name of the guy who saw it. But anyway, it was a big deal, and somebody asked Einstein either before or after the fact what he would say if the test came back negative, if it did not support the predictions made in general relativity. And supposedly Einstein said something to the effect of, "I would feel sorry for the good Lord for being wrong," because the theory was so beautiful to him. It was so obviously it had to be correct that if it turned out that there was empirical evidence against it, I take it as obviously he was being tongue in cheek, because Einstein, he was a great scientist, and I think he would have, however reluctantly, would have changed his views ultimately, but he understood also that deep sense of the intellect, like, no, this is how it should be. This is so obviously the answer. It's so beautiful. And just in general, that's an experience I've had where it's like I'll have the structure and it seems to work. It models it perfectly, but then it's not actually working in the real world. And it's like, I got to bring in this other thing and I've got to attach it to it, and now it's ugly. And now it's like, it's this makeshift. But I have had it happen. I can't think of a specific example, but I know in principle it's happened that as I've learned more, I've realized how impoverished that initial model actually was. And there's something more beautiful waiting for me if I'm willing to gather the information and change things. I realize, it's actually this bigger thing. So there you go. That's some hope for anybody who's struggling with that at the moment. But anyway.
Yeah. Reality isn't ugly.
Exactly.
Your models match up with it is.
Your models match up with it is ugly. We're a firm believer in that.
How are we doing on time? Probably.
Yeah, we should probably cut it off at 2 hours or so. So we've got about a little over 15 minutes.
I'll leave you something interesting that I've explored with this.
Are you all ready?
There's an interesting little quirk with this, which
I think I know what you're doing.
I don't think is that big of a deal. So, for those of you that maybe don't have much experience with this form of logic, or maybe even logic in general, these are all abstractions might be a good word for them. They're categories. They haven't been embodied yet, so to speak. So this is for anything in any way in which that thing may be. When you actually go to work with functions like these, you need to instantiate them. You need to make them into something, so to speak, concrete. So, and you do that by substituting letters for the
I don't know what you call them. There's
Yeah,
an
the
official term.
The
for
term
them,
has eluded me. I've been out of school for a little bit. But you have to instantiate them. So you have to substitute them with letters, and that makes them, in some sense, theoretically in your mind on the board, a concrete thing, a singular thing. So let's instantiate phi of x. We'll just call it b of a. And this is what this looks like once you instantiate it. B of a, if and only if. In this case, it would be, and here's the interesting quirk. If we're going to instantiate this, we have to instantiate phi of x across the board first. So that's going to look like b of a, if and only if. There's some y, there's some c, such that c of y horseshoe b of a dot c of y. I don't know why I keep wanting to make that a u. Something like that.
In case you're wondering, he's instantiated the this expression here ties to this expression here. So this is any attribute and anything, but he's made it a specific attribute. We could say blue for all we care.
Right.
And a specific thing, say Alvin. Alvin is blue.
Yeah.
Alvin the chipmunk is blue.
So Alvin is blue if and only if there is something which, if it were the case, would make him blue, and that thing is in fact the case.
Right.
I messed up.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yep.
I didn't
There
even
is
notice
some
that.
Y,
I
there is some
apologize.
C. I know what was happening. There we go. We need this sign that just says there is one, not any. When we run this, we wind up with there is some Y, there is some C, such that CY, or should be A, dot CY. When we instantiate this, this is where the funny things happen. So maybe at the very end, I need to clarify, and I'm sorry that this has been up wrong for an hour.
I'll do some. I can do some editing to at least acknowledge
I'll
that.
type you out the one from the paper so that
Okay.
you can see this.
Yeah.
This is what represents what I've been talking about, and I'm so very sorry to have screwed that up.
It's all good.
In the written form. For anything and for any way in which that thing may be, it is that way. If and only if there is at least one thing and at least one way in which that thing may be, such that if it is that way, then this is this way, and this actually is the case. What that yields when we play it out in a conditional proof is we wind up with there is some Y, there is some C. When we instantiate this, we have to instantiate it for different letters than have already been used. So we wind up with CD, we could say CD horseshoe BA dot CD. And at the end of this conditional proof, if I remember right, we wind up with BA horseshoe CD horseshoe BA.
I think you forgot the A on the other B.
Yeah, I did.
There you go.
Dot CD. Why is this interesting? It becomes infinite.
Right.
Because
Right.
if BA is the case, then it must be the case, for example, we can say CD horseshoe BA, something else. If this is the case, something else must be the case, and it must be sufficient to create this.
Right.
Well, how did the CD come into play?
Right.
There's something else that led to CD,
Right.
and there's something else that led to that, and there's something else that led to that, and there's something else that led to
Right.
that.
It becomes a chain, a deterministic chain, or
Well,
something like that.
Yes, and you're left with either there's a couple of interesting possibilities. Either, well, no, I think an interesting thing happens, and I think it might have possibly to do with the Big Bang, because, and I know that's a funny place to go from this, but this becomes a sort of infinite regress, which I don't think is a problem. I think it's interesting, because I think this works too well for it to be completely wrong. But the infinite regress, well, that's actually, I think the reason it's not a problem is it's very concordant with our own way of looking at the world. Well, what happened before that? What happened before that?
Right.
I mean, we're inclined to ask that question, going, oh, back and back and back and back and back.
Right.
And it's like, it seems like you're left with either the possibility that either there was a first thing, or somehow, some way, everything is existence is infinite.
Right.
So I have wondered, and I haven't played with it in a logical form, but I've wondered about the possibility that, and I think maybe I've accidentally borrowed this from the Big Bang, so to speak, or maybe it just supports it. What if, at some point, and this is difficult to imagine, there were the first inputs and the first rules.
Right.
And they just are, if there is a beginning point.
Right.
And the reason I think that's interesting, and the reason I entertain it, is I don't know if this is still the case, but I know for some time the talk was the closer you get to the Big Bang, the more the laws of physics as we understand them fall apart.
Right.
Let's get strange for a moment. What if that's because they didn't exist?
Right. I don't know. I don't know enough about it to confirm whether that's on the right track, but it's a question that naturally would arise.
Yeah.
Whether they just weren't even there. Certainly, nobody knows what. Nobody has any clue even what it even means for something to have been before the Big Bang.
Right.
Even what that would entail, or.
I mean, it's the creation of everything.
Yeah.
So it would seem,
including space and time and all that stuff. So what on earth is that supposed to mean?
It's supposedly the creation of at least this reality itself.
Yeah.
And so maybe there is a first iteration where it actually does bottom out in some weird way.
Right.
But actually, I don't think this is really a problem, because if you actually do trace things down,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
you could do an
I'm here
infinite
for a variety of reasons. It just traces on back. So actually, this infinite regress, I think, it's not infinite, but this tendency to regress backwards in time, this caused that, well, that caused this, and this caused that, and it goes on. So on it goes, is actually, I think, is a reflection. I'm just now realizing this. It's not a problem, because I think it's a reflection of, it's certainly in alignment with the way we seem to perceive reality. Things do cause other things, and they do have their roots way far on back. Now, similar to the way that the effects branch infinitely, it may very well be the case that the causes branch infinitely in the other direction. Almost like branches and roots of a tree.
Yes.
And we're just here in the trunk, and maybe we can see the first. We can see the first directions.
Like here, we are here. But then it also goes.
Yeah.
This way, so it goes past and future, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So that we end up being this node here.
Yeah.
And we follow or something like that.
And you have some ability to explain back or predict forward.
Yeah.
But the what do they call it? There's a word for it. The rate of expansion.
Yeah.
Eventually just far precedes your ability to really track it.
Yes.
But that's one interesting little interesting thing about this model that I didn't cover in the paper.
Yeah.
Was that once you instantiate it in a conditional proof, you wind up with this loop. Where it's not a loop, it's this regress. Something caused something caused by something, you know. But I think it may be a feature, not a bug.
Right.
But I wondered about, so either everything goes on forever, which is really hard to, it's funny, you're left with two impossible realities. Either reality is and always has been infinite.
Right.
Or it had a beginning.
And
both of those are weird.
It's I think that's one of the classic, whatever you call them, antinomies that Immanuel Kant played with in the Critique of Pure Reason, where he was arguing that we simply do not have the intellectual resources to ever resolve the question, but it's one of several antinomies where he argues pretty effectively for either side of it and shows how weird either side is. Anyway, that's a separate thing. It's specifically whether the universe has a beginning or not. Well, on that note, I think we're at 2 hours and 1 minute. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm glad we were able to do
good.
this. Maybe we'll be able to do it again sometime. So a few years from now, we'll be able to run back into each other and follow up on where we've been going with it.
Hopefully, if anybody, little shameless plug, if anybody knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who knows Jordan Peterson, I gave him a copy of the work that lays all this out at a lecture of his in March. So if you have that change, see if he's ready yet. No. In all seriousness, maybe we can close with this. I printed and I took a crash course in bookbinding off of YouTube. I printed and bound a copy of this, and I have the best fiance in the world. She got me basically center of second row tickets and VIP meet and greet and all that to see Jordan in March. And so I spent 10 days doing a crash course of binding this thing and presented it to him. And so that was pretty cool. That was sort of a fulfillment of the circle, because I saw him in 2022.
Yeah, right. That was right before you started the program.
Yeah. I saw
program.
Him spring of 22. Told him what I was getting ready to do. I was getting ready to go study philosophy and get a master's in it. Appeared to have his approval from that. He was very encouraging. And then a few years later, I got to hand him a hand-bound copy of the work that I wound up doing.
Yeah, man.
Which is part of a larger work on the Logos, and I actually owe a lot of the way I thought about this problem to the stuff he taught me. So the fact that I got to hand that to him was something
There's
else.
something really, there was something very poignant about that, especially just the way you told it right now.
It was cool.
It's like is old style education. You handed your dissertation off to the guy who kind of started you off on it.
The wild thing about it was, so during the VIP meet and greet, you get to take a picture with him. And that was when I handed it to him. And initially it was going to be set on the table where he was going to do the Q&A afterward.
Oh.
Because there's the Q&A after the main lecture, and then there's another little Q&A after the VIP meet and greet. And initially it was going to be set on the table. He asked me if I wanted it in the picture. I said yes. So we got the picture taken with the copy of the thesis there. And it was so cool because it stayed there on that table throughout the whole thing. And I watched him pick it up and walk off stage with it. And so it was just something very gratifying.
Yeah. Almost on a symbolic level.
Yeah. It was like watching it go.
Yeah.
And very, very exciting. I am much more collected telling the story than I was while it was actually taking place. I was very excited. But, I was very excited. And but he was great. He's gracious as I'd say as always. I've seen him twice. He was the same way both times. Very gracious, happy to see me. Asked me what field it was in. So I got to tell him that I study metaphysics, and that did the ego some good, and it was good. It was good.
So if you know a guy who knows a guy, who can let Logan know whether he's had a chance to look at it, that's pretty neat. But I think at the very least it was important for you to be able to have the fruits of your labor in that way and see them put off into the I was going to say into the ether, but that's not quite what I mean. But
out in the world, that was the other thing. It was like a copy of it exists now.
Yeah.
I tried to follow best practice that maybe in principle, if it's well cared for,
last for a long time.
Yeah, that might be around 300-400 years when someone reads it. I plan on doing a limited run, a few more, one for me, one for myself, and maybe one for the kids or something. When they're older.
Send one to me.
Yeah,
if you get a chance.
Yeah, it's an interesting process.
Yeah.
If anybody wants a hobby that'll drive you mad when you do it the first time, get into bookbinding. But it's a lot of fun. So I'll do a few more.
As it turns out, our sponsor for this video is Bookbinding in Court. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
If you want your book bound, that'd be amazing. If I did have a sponsor for this video, that was Bookbinding.
Yeah.
This whole video leading up to that.
That'd be funny. Yeah. But so it's out there now. It exists in a way that it kind of didn't before.
Yeah.
Because
you brought it into actuality.
Yeah, digital's great, but if any of y'all have any interest in reading it, you can find it at.
I'll put a link in the description. Yeah.
But digital's great, but it existed in a different way.
Yeah.
Once it was, I could hold it. It was on paper and leather and
flip the pages.
It existed in a really cool way that it kind of didn't, in a way.
Yeah.
Sort of, prior to it being printed and bound and put together. So.
On that note, it's been a pleasure. Let us know what you think in the comments below. I'll post a link to your YouTube channel because he makes music too. He's pretty good at it. I would say. Really good at it.
I suppose.
So you should definitely check him out for that.
Yeah.
But I will see you all in the next video. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
Absolutely. Shake my hand on screen.
All right.
And we'll end right. Sorry, I'm being awkward about it. All right. Bye.